Hello, friends. How are you? It's been a little while, but we have a new book. It actually got released yesterday. It's been all over the news, and if you don't know what title I'm talking about, you can probably just look at the subject title of this particular recording. Rage by Woodward. Not to spoil the fun or anything, but before we jump in, there's been a lot going on in the news. Everything from the recordings of Mr. Woodward's of President Trump, essentially saying that he willfully neglected to tell the American people exactly how important it was that we act on the coronavirus, because he just wanted to keep us all calm and compliant, because apparently that's a good way to do it. Just outwardly lie and tell everybody it's okay and don't wear masks and don't do anything special and just keep spending money because, hey, it's just going to go away all by itself. And then, we turn our attention to the border camps, right? Those detention centers where they've been keeping women and children and a bunch of other people hostage because all they did was come looking for amnesty. And wouldn't you know it, ICE has been giving some of the women hysterectomies. Yeah, fun. You know who else did that? The Nazis to the Jewish people. But hey, whatever. America, right? America. And then you have a bunch of freaking fire-starting, Fox News sniffing morons running around talking about how, if Trump loses, the left is just going to go on a shooting spree. So, they're trying to fire up the right into insurrection, apparently, because, God help us if they lose. And, on top of all of that, you have the frosting on the shit cake where a bunch of, investors and accountants and tax planners and estate people, the money-grabbing sector of the economy that adds absolutely no value unless you're looking to actively snub the government and your taxes. Telling people to essentially, dump assets now, sell them now, do whatever you can, because God knows what Biden is going to do. It's going to increase the whatever taxes on, who cares, right? Because, paying your dues back into society is a problem, right? God help you if you use a car on our public roads or send your kids to public school or call a policeman, although apparently we can't do that anymore either, because the second you go defund the police, by which you do not mean to take all the money away from a police officer. No, you mean to redistribute the funds into, all the different buckets that are necessary for a just and conscientious society. You have a bunch of people, but you have to defend the police. Look how many things are on their backs. Anyway, I could spend way too much time just getting it all out there. But hey, we're going to see each other at least a couple times a week until we get through this. According to my nifty little counter here, it's going to take us quite a number of sessions, judging by how long it took us to get through Mary Trump's book. I'd give it a solid month of a few readings a week. So without further ado, a prologue from Rage by Mr. Woodward himself. During the top secret President's Daily Brief, the afternoon of Tuesday, January 28th, 2020, discussion in the Oval Office turned to a mysterious pneumonia-like virus outbreak in China. Public health officials and President Trump himself were telling the public the virus was low risk for the United States. "This will be the biggest national security threat you face in your presidency," Robert O'Brien, the national security advisor, told Trump, expressing a jarring contrarian view as deliberately and as strongly as possible. Trump's head popped up. He asked the intelligence PBB briefer, Beth Sanner, several questions. She said China was worried and the intelligence community was monitoring it, but it looked like this would not be anything nearly as serious as the deadly 2003 Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, SARS, outbreak. This is going to be the roughest thing you face, persisted O'Brien from his seat around the Resolute desk, well aware that Trump was only midway through his impeachment trial in the Senate, which had begun 12 days early and was consuming his attention. O'Brien believed the National Security Advisor had to try to see around corners, a duty to warn of an impending disaster. And this problem was urgent, not some geopolitical issue that might happen 3 years down the road. This virus could develop very quickly in the United States. O'Brien, 53, a lawyer, author, and former international hostage negotiator, was Trump's fourth national security advisor. Holy shit. That guy knows some stress. I mean, I'm kind of in awe of just that pedigree by itself. I don't know what kind of shitbag he is to be working for Trump, quite honestly. But, hostage negotiator? I mean, for real, that's some serious creds. Anyway, I will continue. He had been in the key post only 4 months and did not consider himself a pound your fist on the table kind of person, but he felt passionate that the outbreak was a real threat. I agree with that conclusion, said Matt Pottinger, the Deputy National Security Advisor, from a couch further back in the Oval Office. Trump knew Pottinger, 46, who had been with the National Security Council staff for 3 years since the beginning of the Trump presidency, was uniquely, almost perfectly qualified to deliver such an assessment. His warning was authoritative and carried weight. Pottinger had lived in China 7 years and been a Wall Street Journal reporter there during the SARS outbreak. A China scholar, he spoke fluent Mandarin. Affable, profane, and a workaholic, Pottinger also was a decorated former Marine intelligence officer, a job that culminated in co-authoring an influential report about the inadequacies of U.S. intelligence agencies. Pottinger knew firsthand that the Chinese were masters at concealing trouble and covering it up. He had written over 30 stories about SARS and how the Chinese had intentionally withheld information for months about its seriousness and vastly understated its spread, a mishandling that allowed SARS to move around the globe. The Journal had submitted this work for a Pulitzer Prize. What do you know? Trump asked Pottinger. For the last 4 days, Pottinger said he had been working the phones, calling doctors in China and Hong Kong he had maintained contact with and who understood the science. He'd also been reading Chinese social media. Is this going to be as bad as 03? He had asked one of his contacts in China. Don't think SARS 2003, the expert replied. Think influenza pandemic 1918. Pottinger said he had been floored. The so-called Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 killed an estimated 50 million people worldwide, with about 675,000 deaths in the United States. Just to interject here, there were 675,000 deaths with the Spanish flu. If you're not keeping up with the numbers, I presume you are, but we're just about brushing against 200,000, and the experts are warning that we're about ready to hit the second wave, so we could very easily hit 500,000 by the end of the year. Anyway, why do you think it will be worse than 2003? Asked the president. Pottinger's contacts told him 3 factors were dramatically accelerating the transmission of the new disease. Contrary to official hedged reports from the Chinese government, people were getting the disease easily from other people, not just animals. This is called human-to-human spread. He had just learned that morning it was able to spread by people who didn't show any symptoms. This is called asymptomatic spread. His best, most authoritative source said 50% were infected, but showed no symptoms. This meant a once-in-a-lifetime health emergency. A virus out of control with a vast amount of the spread not immediately detectable, and it had already traveled far from Wuhan, China, where the outbreak apparently began. To Pottinger, these were the 3 alarms of a 3-alarm fire. Most troubling, Pottinger said, the Chinese had essentially quarantined Wuhan, a city of 11 million people, larger than any American city. People could not travel within China, say from Wuhan to Beijing. But they had not cut off travel from China to the rest of the world, including the United States. That meant a highly infectious and devastating virus was probably already silently streaming into the United States. What do we do about it? The president asked. Cut off travel from China to the United States, Pottinger said. Pottinger was confident the information from his source was solid, based on hard data, not speculation. He launched an in-depth examination of the new virus. The first case outside China had been reported on January 13th in Thailand. Clearly, the virus was spreading human to human. Top officials at the Center for Disease Control, the nation's chief public agency, had also been reporting with increasing alarm to Pottinger that they had been trying for weeks to send the crack U.S. disease detectives from the Epidemic Intelligence Service to China to see what was going on. The Chinese had stonewalled, refusing to cooperate and share samples of the virus as required by international agreement. The head of the Chinese CDC had sounded like a hostage in one phone call, and the Chinese health minister also refused U.S. assistance. Pottinger had seen this movie before. He picked up the pace of his calls the weekend of January 24th through 26th. I came out of that weekend with my hair standing on end, Pottinger said privately. Several Chinese elites, well connected with the Communist Party and the government, signaled that they thought China had a sinister goal. China's not going to be the only one to suffer from this. If China was the only country to have mass infections on the scale of the 1918 pandemic, they would be at a massive economic disadvantage. It was a suspicion, but one held by the people who knew the regime best. A frightening possibility. Pottinger, a China hawk, was not ready to make a judgment on China's intent one way or the other. Most likely the outbreak was accidental. But he was certain the United States was in for an unparalleled health onslaught. The China's lack of transparency would only make it worse. With SARS, the Chinese had egregiously concealed the outbreak of a dangerous new infectious disease for 3 months. 3 days later, on January 31st, the president did impose restrictions on travelers from China, a move opposed by a number of his cabinet members, but his public attention was focused on just about everything except the virus. The upcoming Super Bowl, the technological meltdown in the Democratic caucuses in Iowa. Wow, I forgot that even happened. His State of the Union address, and most importantly, the impeachment trial in the Senate. When the highly infectious respiratory disease caused by the novel coronavirus known as COVID-19 did come up in settings when he had the opportunity to reach a larger number of Americans, Trump continued to reassure the public they faced little risk. How concerned are you about coronavirus? Sean Hannity asked Trump on February 2nd, near the end of a pre-Super Bowl game interview focused largely on the unfairness of impeachment and his 2020 Democratic rivals. We pretty much shut it down coming in from China, Trump said. Something of a pre-game presidential tradition, the interview drew the largest ever audience for the controversial and popular talk show host. We're offering tremendous help. We have the best in the world for that, but we can't have thousands of people coming in who may have this problem, the coronavirus. That morning, even National Security Advisor O'Brien, who had issued the ominous warning just days earlier, had said on CBS's Face the Nation, right now, there's no reason for Americans to panic. This is something that is a low risk, we think, in the United States. 2 days later, on February 4th, nearly 40 million Americans tuned in to watch the president's annual State of the Union address, a constitutionally mandated update to Congress about the most pressing issues facing the country. The speech is the highest visibility moment for a president to address matters of great importance. About halfway through the lengthy speech, Trump mentioned coronavirus in one short paragraph. Protecting Americans' health also means fighting infectious diseases. We are coordinating with the Chinese government and working closely together on the coronavirus outbreak in China, Trump said. My administration will take all necessary steps to safeguard our citizens from this threat. That did not, however, include sharing any part of the warning he had received with the public. When I later asked the president about the warnings from O'Brien, he said he didn't recall it. You know, I'm sure he said it, Trump said. Nice guy. And in an interview with President Trump on March 19th, six weeks before I learned of O'Brien's and Pottinger's warnings, the president said his statement in the early weeks of the virus had been deliberately designed to not draw attention to it. I wanted to always play it down, Trump told me. I still like playing it down because I don't want to create a panic. Trump called me at home about 9 p.m. on Friday, February 7th, 2020. Since he had been acquitted in the Senate impeachment trial 2 days earlier, I expected he would be in a good mood. Now we've got a little bit of interesting setback with the virus going on in China, he said. He had spoken with President Xi Jinping of China the night before. Setback? I was surprised the virus was on his mind, rather than his acquittal. There were only 12 confirmed cases in the United States. The first reported coronavirus death in the United States was 3 weeks away. The news had been all impeachment all the time. The Chinese were very focused on the virus, Trump said. I think that goes away in 2 months with the heat, Trump said. You know, as it gets hotter, that tends to kill the virus. You know, you hope. He added, we had a great talk for a long time, but we have a good relationship. I think we like each other a lot. I reminded the president that in earlier interviews for this book, he had told me he had harshly confronted President Xi about the Made in China 2025 plan to overtake the United States and become the world's leading producer in high-tech manufacturing in 10 industries from driverless cars to biomedicine. That's very insulting to me, Trump had told Xi. The president had also said with fierce pride that he was breaking China's ass on trade and caused China's annual economic growth rate to go negative. Oh yeah, we've had some arguments, Trump acknowledged. So what did President Xi said yesterday? Oh, we were talking mostly about the virus, Trump said. Why? I wondered. Mostly? And I think he's going to have it in good shape, Trump said. But you know, it's a very tricky situation. What made it tricky? It goes through the air, Trump said. That's always tougher than the touch. You don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air and that's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than even your strenuous flus. Deadly was a very strong word. Something was obviously going on here that I was not focused on. Over the next month, I would make trips to Florida and the West Coast, oblivious to the mounting pandemic. At this point, I also was not aware O'Brien had told the president the virus will be the biggest national security threat that you face in your presidency. I'd heard no one calling for any change in Americans' behavior other than not traveling to China. Americans went about their daily lives, including more than 60 million who traveled by air domestically that month. In our call, Trump had surprising detail about the virus. Trump continued, pretty amazing, this is more deadly than the flu, maybe 5 times more so. This is deadly stuff, Trump repeated. He praised President Xi. I think he's going to do a good job. He built a number of hospitals in record-setting time. They know what they're doing. They're very organized. And we'll see. We're working with them. We're sending them things in terms of equipment and lots of other things. And the relationship is very good, much better than before. It was strained because of the trade deal. My first book on his presidency, Fear, Trump in the White House, had been published 17 months before this February 7th phone call. Fear described Trump as an emotionally overwrought, mercurial, and unpredictable leader who had created a governing crisis and a nervous breakdown of the executive power of the most powerful country in the world. While discussing Fear on television, I was asked for my bottom-line summary of Trump's leadership. Let's hope to God we don't have a crisis, I said. Trump had declined to be interviewed for Fear, but regularly told aides he wished he had cooperated. So for this book, he agreed to be interviewed. By February 7th, we were on our 6th of what would be 17 interviews. I asked, what's the plan for the next 8 to 10 months? Just do well, Trump replied. Just do well, run the country well. Help me define well, I said. Look, Trump said, when you're running a country, it's full of surprises. There's dynamite behind every door. Years ago, I had once heard a similar expression used by military forces to describe the hazards and nerve-wracking emotions of house-to-house searches in a violent combat zone. I was surprised at this dynamite behind every door language from Trump. Instead of being his usual upbeat, cheerleading, or angry self, the president sounded foreboding, even unconfident, with a touch of unexpected fatalism. You want to say good, but then something happens, Trump continued. Boeing happens as an example. Boeing was the greatest company in the world, and all of a sudden it has a big misstep, and it hurts the country. Boeing is still reeling from the problems with its 737 MAX airplane, which had been grounded in 2019 after back-to-back fatal crashes with 5 months in Indonesia and Ethiopia, killing all 346 people on board. General Motors goes out on strike, Trump said, giving another example. Nearly 50,000 auto workers had held a 40-day strike in the fall of 2019. They shouldn't have gone. They should have been able to work that out, but they couldn't do it. They go on strike. Hundreds of thousands of people aren't working. All of this stuff happens, and you have to make it good. There's dynamite behind every door, seemed the most self-aware statement about the jeopardy, pressures, and responsibilities of the presidency I had heard Trump make in a public or private setting. Yet, the unexpected headline from the call was also his detailed knowledge of the virus and his description of it as so deadly so early in February, more than a month before it began to engulf him, his presidency, and the United States. And so at odds with his public tone. The details from his call with Z were troubling. I only later learned that much more had been hidden, that his top White House national security advisors had warned him of impending disasters in the U.S. He believed China and Z could not be trusted, that his top health advisors had tried desperately to get their medical team into China to investigate, that Trump himself had offered to help Z and been personally rebuffed. Z was concealing a lot. So was Trump. Who was responsible for the failure to warn the American public of the coming pandemic? Where was the breakdown? What leadership decisions did Trump make or fail to make in the crucial early weeks? It would take me months to get answers to those questions. After reporting fear, I thought it was likely the potential crisis I worried about might arise from foreign affairs, where Trump had the least experience and took the greatest risk. So when I began my new reporting for this book last year, well before the arrival of the virus, I decided to look again and more deeply at the national security team he recruited and built in the first months after his election in 2016. I now see that Trump's handling of the virus, certainly the greatest test for him and his presidency, at least so far, reflects the instincts, habits, and style acquired in the first year as president and over the course of a lifetime. One of the greatest questions of any presidency is, how does it end? But so is the question, how did it begin? So we turn there. All right, folks. Well, that concludes the prologue. Join me again, hopefully tomorrow, and we'll jump right into chapter 1. All right. Well, it's been fun. It's good to see everybody again. Again, hit me up in the comments if you have any questions, and talk to you soon. Bye. Stay sane out there.